Perfect timing.
He'd probably like me. He had to go to the bathroom last minute, so we make it.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get her started. Welcome to the workshop meeting for the Wyoming Water Development Commission. First item up will be roll call. Mr. Assistant Secretary.
Is that what I am?
That's what you are.
Okay. Nick Bettis. Here. Karen Bud Fallon. David Evans here. Gerald Geis.
Here.
Clinton Glick. Kellen Lancaster.
Here.
Sheridan Little.
Here.
Jeanette Sican.
Here.
Larry Sukor.
Here.
And Rod Wagner.
Here. Mr. Chairman, you get a call earlier today that Clinton Glick is in transit, so I do expect him to join your meeting sometime this afternoon.
Okay, well, it looks like we have a quorum. Next item will be audience introductions. We'll start with Daniel.
Daniel Solish, the Attorney General's office.
And Larson, House District 25 in the Powell area.
Kellen Lancaster from Star Valley, District 4 with Water Development.
David Evans, Commissioner, Division 1, Cheyenne.
Rod Wagner, Wyoming Water Development, District 1.
Larry Suker, Water Development Commissioner, District 2.
Gerald Geis, District 3 out of the Bighorn Basin.
Sheridan Little, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Water Division 2.
Jennifer Pratt Miles, a facilitator with Meridian Institute.
Nick Bettis, Wyoming Water Development Commission, District 4 out of Kemmer.
Jeanette Seacon, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Division 3. I live in Cody.
Glenn Moniz, Senate District 10 out of Albany County.
Larry Hicks, Senate District 11, part of Albany, Olive Carbon, and part of Sweetwater County.
Katie Talbot, Water Development Office.
Labonte, Director, Water Development Office.
Jody Green, Water Development Office.
Barry Lawrence, Water Development Office.
Brian Clerk at Water Development Office.
Kevin Boyce, Water Development Office.
Steve Wolf, State Engineer's Office. Andrew Graham, Wildfire.
Greg Kerr, University of Wyoming Office of Water Programs.
Rachel Badger, also Associates.
Brandon Gellert, HDR Engineering. Chris Nicholson, Water Resources Data System.
All right, thank you. Welcome to the meeting. Next item would be to review public hearings, proposed level 3 projects. Barry.
Mr. Chairman, under tab A, you see a summary of the public hearings that were conducted back in the December timeframe. We do those in advance of level 3 projects that have not had a public hearing up until that date. And so I will let Barry give you a summary of those hearings that we conducted.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Select Water. Before you, as Harry has indicated, under tab A is the project hearing tour summary from the tours that we conducted on the week of December 4th through 8th. I should tell you that there are 12 project hearings held during that week. And we actually broke the state out into 4 parts with different hearing officers, and it was broken out by geographic area. The first tour there, and you see the darker lines indicate the demarcation between the tours. So I'll run through these briefly and then answer any questions you might have. The first tour, I was the hearing officer. Started out Monday, December 4th, 4 o'clock in Riverton. It was the Riverton Valley Irrigation District Rehab Project, 2018. There were 7 individuals present, and there were no public comments. Moving on the next morning, and I was pleased to have Senator Geis join me on that swing that week, that day in Bighorn Basin. And we went around, and Worland was the first up at 9 a.m. And it was the Hanover Irrigation District Cottonwood Spill Check Replacement 2018 project. There were 9 people in attendance, and there were no comments. Then later in the day at noon at the Cali Town Hall, we had the Sidon Irrigation District Rehabilitation 2018 project. 3 individuals were in attendance. Again, Commissioner Geis and myself were there, and there were no public comments. And the last one for this swing, later in the day at 2 o'clock at Park County Courthouse, the Northwest Rural Water System Improvements Project. There were 7 folks in attendance, and I'm pleased that Commissioner Seekin was also able to join us with that one. And so is Commissioner Seekin and Geis, myself, and 7 people total. And there were no public comments at that public hearing. So that was the first tour. Second tour, and this was conducted by Jason Mead, head of Dams and Reservoir, and it was for the West Fork project. It was a one-stop tour. It was 1 o'clock, basically, on Tuesday, December 5th, and it was for the West Fork Reservoir project. There were 19 people in attendance. It was one of the largest. We had 2 that were 19, 21 folks in attendance, 19 folks in attendance. As I said, Jason was the hearing officer. There were 16 comments in support of the project. We also received 1 email comment in support of the project after the meeting. And then more recently, and just happened, and it's not included here on the sheet, but you should have received, we did receive 1 letter in opposition. And it's my understanding that that went out to the commission as well as the legislators.
So let me just ask, commissioners, did you receive that letter? And it was from the McKees?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Mm-mm.
Up on my end, it was addressed to the Water Development Office with copy to legislative members. So we'll get you a copy of that. Okay, please.
Okay. Third tour, Kevin Boyce in our office, project manager in our office in the planning division, conducted this tour. This was up in the Snake Salt basins. And starting on Wednesday, December 6th at 12:34 in the afternoon in Jackson, it was the Melody Ranch Water System Improvements Project. And we also there had Commissioner Lancaster join us. Thank you, Commissioner Lancaster, for joining. And we had 7 folks in attendance. And at that time, we had 3 board members commented in support of the project. And then later that day, 4:30 in the afternoon in Afton, River Valley Energy, we have a hearing for the Cottonwood Irrigation District Pipeline Replacement Project. And this project had the honor of having the most folks in attendance. 21 folks were in attendance at this meeting and at this hearing. And again, Commissioner Lancaster was there, and Kevin Boyce ran that hearing. All the comments that were at that hearing were in support of the project. That was the third tour. And then the fourth and final tour, Brian Clerkin, head of our construction division, ran this tour, and this is kind of northeast Wyoming to include Casper and Glenrock. And starting out on Thursday, December 7th at 9:30 in the morning, Brian was in Lusk for the Lusk Water System Improvements Project, and there were 4 folks in attendance and no comment. Moving on later in the day at 1:30 in the Gillette City Hall, it was the Gillette Regional Extensions Phase 4 project, and Brian was the hearing officer, and 1 person was in attendance. And Brian, was that just you, or I don't know?
There's running copies.
Oh, sorry. Okay. And then no comments there. And then Thursday, December 7th, 4:30 in the afternoon at Sheridan City Hall, the Sheridan Northside Transmission Pipeline Project. There were 4 folks in attendance. And again, Brian Clerkin was the hearing officer. There were no comments. And then the final day of the tours, Friday, December 8th at 10 in the morning in Casper, at Casper City Hall, we had the Casper Alcova Irrigation District Underdrain 2018 project. Brian was the hearing officer. We had 3 folks in attendance, and there were no comments. And the very last hearing on the way home, Friday, December 8th at 11:30 in the morning, the Glenrock Transmission Pipeline Project. There were 2 folks in attendance. Brian was the hearing officer, and there were no comments. And that's a summary of the 4 tours of duty, basically, for the week of public hearings. And thank you to the commissioners that participated in some of those.
Any questions for Harry on the, or Barry, excuse me, on the public hearings? Okay, thanks, Barry. Okay, next is the financial status report. Harry?
Mr. Chairman, that's under tab B in your notebook, and these projections have not changed since when we first presented those to you back in August. But kind of as a refresher, just want to go through those very quickly because tomorrow you will be considering planning, construction, and 2 other bills that will utilize funds based in the 3 water development accounts. So the first projection, water development account 1, and again it's showing previous year expenditures, revenues. It gets you a total uncommitted balance as of July 1st of 17, and then we bring in the revenue streams for 18 and 19 and 20 that would be available for projects or projects in the upcoming biennium. And then, and this was since August, we've added what are estimated non-project appropriations that are made out of Water Development Account 1. As you can see, starts out with the Drinking Water SRF match, Department of Ag, State Engineer's Office for Interstate Streams, State Engineer's Office for the Board of Control, and then finally the Water Development Office agency budget. Those total $23 million for the biennium, and we are projecting that you will have in excess of $61 million available for project expenditures for this coming session, the 2018 session, as well as the 2019 session. So, like we've talked in the past, my goal in presenting projects was to kind of put the project requests or recommendations at about 50% of this amount, so that you spend 50% this session and 50% in the next session. The current 2018 bills total just under 25 million. So you're underneath that 50% threshold for account 1. In account 2, the same analysis. We do not have non-project expenditures coming out of account 2. So our projection for the upcoming biennium is $14,500,000, slightly in excess of that, available for 2 sessions. So about 7.2 or so million would be the 50% level. Currently, the 2018 bills that you'll consider tomorrow total about $8.8 million, so it's over that 50% level. There is an amendment that I'll present to you tomorrow, which will be to move one of these projects from account 2 to account 1, but we can detail that tomorrow, so it'll make that at least meeting the goal of 50% a little bit closer. And then finally, in account 3, you can see that the uncommitted balance as of July 1st, 2017 is 51 million, in excess of 51 million. You see the revenue streams that come into this account. Taxes at about $800,000 per year. Interest is the larger component, about $3 million a year in total. And so we are projecting that you have about $60 million to spend on projects. In account 3, we handle it a little bit differently because it has such a small influx of new revenue, 0.5% of the severance tax the severance tax distribution account, that it's really just been used as that's what's spent. You really can't rely on $15-20 million coming into it in the next biennium or the next fiscal year. You really have to focus on the current balance, and then a fairly small revenue stream that comes in every fiscal year. So $60 million that's available. The 2018 bills recommend just $40,330,000 in appropriations. So if those are approved ultimately by the legislature and the governor, yourself, legislature and the governor, then we would have a balance available going forward of about $20 million after this legislation. Any questions on the fiscal projections?
Harry. All right. Looks like you're getting off easy, Harry.
Okay.
I guess with that, next item is the review of the Snake River Sporting Club's groundwater exploration grant application.
Mr. Chairman, under tab C in your notebooks, and I'm looking at select water committee members your notebooks. I don't see you using the notebooks, but it would be a tab D in your notebook unless you have it electronically. So this is, as the title indicates, a groundwater exploration grant request. Snake River Sporting Club Improvement and Service District. It's located about 15 miles south of Jackson. And this application was originally brought to you, I believe, in August. Like we had the complete set of information in terms of the land ownership. And so Kevin Boyce here, our project manager, has been working with the applicant information. So I'm going to kind of skip through this recommendation to kind of give you the background before I get to at least the staff recommendation before you. And there's certainly many options that you have available. We identified 4 potentially that you may want to consider. But I'm at the bottom of page 1 of the recommendations, and I'll just read this. Item 4 summarizes the reasons for the request. So the district has 2 existing drinking water supply wells are pumped beyond capacity in maximum demand, which is late summer, early fall periods of use. So 2 existing wells, but they are at capacity. And there's apparently interference between those 2 wells. One is shallower than the other. And ultimately, this request is to drill a new well, a 3rd well, and it would be located in the Snake River alluvium, which is different than where the other 2 wells are located. They're located in really further away from the river. And certainly we have representatives from the Snake River and their consultant here to talk about that. So that's the basis of the request, to drill a well, and under the drinking water, under the groundwater exploration program, the way it's set up is the state of Wyoming will cost share 75% state funds, 25% local share for municipal or drinking water type wells. And this certainly fits into the category. So the question in August dealt with, is there a developer that would benefit from this? And while it's not specifically stated in the groundwater program, it is stated in your operating criteria with regards to our traditional program under level 3 projects. It's not the intent of this program to provide taxpayer dollars, state funds, that would ultimately benefit a developer. Okay, so a new subdivision, if they came in and asked for funding, we would say no, that's a developer's responsibility. We're here to really fund and assist existing populations, and potentially if there's growth involved, then that's certainly included at times. So I'll direct your attention to page 2, because the question in August was, is there a developer involved? Is there prospective development that can take place? And would they benefit from this grant? So starting at the top of the page, this is the quantification of lots and taps and that have been developed currently in this subdivision. So currently, there's 102 residential lots, or they've been allocated taps on this system. 31 of those lots have structures. 71 are, in essence, vacant lots. Then there's a category, amenity lots with taps and structures. This involves the clubhouse, tennis, golf course, and the gatehouse. There are 4 lots that fall into that category. So if you look at total lots with taps, you combine those 2, there's 106 lots, of which 35 of those have structures. The remainder, 71, do not. So then there is also, so in the breakout then of lots that do not have structures currently, and Kevin in his analysis, we polled or were given the ownership of these lots. There are a number of those that are owned by LLCs. And so we put those into a category. And again, this is of the total of 106 lots. And you can see Snake River Sporting Club Lots, LLC, Snake River Sporting Partners, LLC, and go down the list. There's a total of 49 lots that are owned by LLCs. The question that you're going to be asked is whether or not those fit within the definition of developer. So then continuing on with regards to the existing hot springs, there's a total of 4 lots there. You see the ownership for 3 of those, or excuse me, 3 of those have taps, and there is 1 without a tap currently. And then finally, and this is where we wanted to bring the map out to you so you can see where these areas are. Outside of, and my map's half covered up with paper, but there are a number of lots, SR, BR lots 1 through 10 and 24 through 27, the Shear parcel, the Harris parcel, and then the Wagoneer track 144. Those are existing parcels within this development, but they are not currently allocated taps. But they represent a land parcel that at some point in the future could be developed. So we counted those, and those total 17. And then we were informed by Teton County Planning, and we spoke with them, that there is, and actually, do we have it noted on, Kevin, did we note this on the map in terms of the replat potential?
No, but it's that.
Okay. So lots 1 through 6, yeah, of the existing subdivision, so 6 lots that we have counted in this tabulation I've given you, are proposed for replat. And in the replat, they would go from 6 lots to 31 lots. And that's a net increase of 25 lots. So that's, at least in our review, the tabulation of what we see in terms of properties there. So now if you proceed to page 7 of the recommendation, what Kevin has done is we've developed, I think, some reasonable alternatives that you may consider with regards to funding this application. First one would be full funding of their request, which would be a 75% grant. The total project cost is estimated to be $240,000 to drill this well. And 75% grant then would be a $180,000 grant that would be granted to the Improvement and Service District. The second potential option that I think is available to you, which would be getting back to, again, this premise that we're not in the business of funding developers or developments and basically not providing a windfall to developers, would be an analysis that if you look at all of those parcels that I described going through there, some with houses, some without, some with, there's the 25 increase with the potential if you total all those up, you have 152 parcels within this development, or the potential for that. So then if you look at those lots that currently have structures on them, and we talked about some of the residential properties, there's the Astoria Hot Springs properties, the clubhouse and such that exist. There's 38 of those. So if you take that percentage, and again, I'm focusing on the existing development, the existing structures are there, 38 of those properties are developed out of 152, and that represents 25% of this development is built out in that analysis. And so option 2 for your consideration is that if we take if you fund 25% of the request, which is a 75% request, so 25% of 75, and you would be providing a 19% grant. So eligible costs Water Development would agree to fund 19% of that on that particular scenario. The third option for your consideration would be to only consider as the developer piece those properties that are owned by an LLC. Again, assuming, and in fact, a couple of those own multiple lots, that there's a corporation involved and they have bought several lots and they have at least plans to develop. If you go through that analysis, again, 152 base lots, 49 lots that have an LLC attachment or ownership. Then there are the ranch lots, these larger lots that, again, are part of the system but could potentially connect into the system at some future date. There's 11 of those. And then take the lots, the increased number of lots as a result of that replat. So going from 6 to 31, there's a 25 net increase. If you total those up, you have 85 lots in that scenario that could be considered potentially a developer or undeveloped at this time, and somebody will benefit. And if you go through that same math, 85 of those lots being undeveloped and in this category out of 152, that's 56%. What that means is that you would fund the remainder of that, or 44% of their request. So 44% of those lots are either occupying a structure or they're owned by individuals, as the case may be. And in that scenario, 44% times 75%, you get a 33% grant match that we would fund with regards to the sponsor. And then the last option, I think that is certainly worth consideration, is that this is a subdivision. And I think we talked about the history of this a little bit. The original developer has gone bankrupt, is no longer involved. Through the breakup of that, or the settlement of that bankruptcy, then these properties that have been duly subdivided have been sold off, and we now have multiple owners. But in that, you can see that the largest majority of this development is at this point undeveloped. And the point that I would make to you, as I indicated at the beginning of the discussion, is what the developer has provided, or what was at least there initially, are these two wells, and they, on a kind of a marginal basis, meet the demand of the existing developed properties, those with structures. And there are peak days there where they don't fully meet that. But the developer has really left a system, or a water supply portion of this system, that's adequate to meet the existing development. Obviously not adequate to further develop this property. So in that context, you may consider that the existing water system is marginally acceptable for the existing development, and any grant dollars you provide would be benefiting the largely undeveloped properties. So in that scenario, you may want to consider not funding this application at all. Those are kind of four options that we have developed. My recommendation to you is to go with the second option there, and that is to fund 19% of the requested grant amount. So in that case, that would represent a total of a $45,600 grant. And again, it's 19% of eligible costs. So the district were to submit an application or a payment application, we would pay 19% of that, not 75, but 19%. And I think at that point, at this point in time, either Kevin or myself would stand for questions, and the applicant is driven from Jackson. And I think obviously this is an important project for them to make sure they have an adequate water system for this development. And I'm sure they want to address you as well. So, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Harry or Kevin on the project? Commissioner Lancaster.
So in 2006, my rock crusher was sitting right about where this new well is supposed to be. It was And in the spring of the next year, this bankruptcy happened or started to. And I had been bought out by that time in that interim, and he didn't get paid. But all that's gone away, and it's not going to, doesn't matter anymore, right? It's got a clear title. You got a clear title? Okay. Number two, if the well is approved, it doesn't sound like you've got the infrastructure to pipe the water to these new lots. True or false?
False.
The pipe's big enough?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You wanna-
Come up to
Can
the
you come up
microphone.
to the mic and state who you are? That's all right.
Miho Jorgensen Associates. We are the engineering consultant. So the two wells were drilled. Actually, when the bankruptcy occurred, Teton County ended up having to take over the bond that was fronted. There were actually two bankruptcies, unfortunately, from the inception. In 2009,
Pull the mic closer to you, because.
Sir. 9 and 10, Teton County called on the bond to complete the construction of all infrastructure, road, water, and sewer systems. So as part of that, they completed the construction of the two existing wells, the storage tank, and the distribution system. However, there still is infrastructure that will need to be constructed from this new well location up to interconnect with the workings of the other wells. So that's been part of our analysis and design as well. But obviously we can only apply for the actual well at this point.
Question. The golf course itself, is it private to the homeowners or is it public?
It's a private course to the homeowners and membership.
Mr. Chairman? Commissioner Bud Found.
Would this project have been eligible for the Wyoming watershed or the Wyoming Water Development Commission funding prior to the bankruptcies and all that stuff when this was just a huge fancy development?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Fallon, no, because it would be a developer bringing forward this project, and the intent, and this is the way most municipalities operate, is that when new land is brought under development, there's an expectation that the subdivider or the developer pays for all of the infrastructure, water, sewer, telecommunications, power, streets, all of that is paid for by the developer, and the developer then recoups his investment by selling lots. That becomes a cost of those lots. And so in the scenario of the original developer coming forward, the answer would be no, we would not have considered this as an eligible project.
So in essence, what we would be doing here is preempting any future development by providing this up front. I mean, preempting, we'd be providing this so that when a developer comes in, this is already done.
Commissioner, I have kind of an overview of the history. If I might be able to kind of, that would ultimately answer that question, if I might be able to walk through that, if it would please the commission.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, and we appreciate the opportunity. Members of the ISD, Joe Cranston and Tom Merck are here with me as well. We really are appreciative of the staff time that they've spent kind of working through this, because it isn't crystal clear. There's a lot of history here. So we appreciate the time, and we are truly appreciative of the offering for partial funding. So don't get us wrong at all. We just want to give a little bit of the background and kind of as it relates to this definition of windfall and new development. So if I might direct you to the.
So, Mr. Chairman, while we're getting that set up, let me just also point out to you that this is not necessarily a new issue that the commission has faced. And I think you're very familiar with some developments in Campbell County from the 1970s development, 1980s development, where again, we have developers coming in, subdividing property. And in those cases, they sell the lots and then the developer leaves. And what we have found over the last 25, 30 years is a number of those water systems were substandard. Piping wasn't big enough. The wells didn't produce enough water, all of those kinds of problems. Generally, though, most of those subdivisions have been built out or developed. And so then an improvement and service district is formed, or a water district, and that makes them eligible for our funding. And so they have come to us, come to the Water Development Commission, seeking funding to basically develop an adequate water system, whether that be additional water supply, whether that be larger pipelines, it may be a tank or something, anything along those lines. And in that case, we have been in the business of, and I'll say it, really coming in and cleaning up a mess after a substandard development. But again, at that point, the developer is out of the picture. You're dealing with a group of homeowners or landowners here that are truly suffering from an inadequate water supply. And so this isn't without precedent, is I guess what I'm trying to say, that we do assist these improvement and service districts. It's just in this case, as the numbers indicate, there's a large majority of these lots that remain undeveloped at this point in time.
Commissioner Geis.
But Harry, we shut it off and got it straightened out, but there wasn't golf courses and all that stuff involved in that stuff up at Gillette. They were strictly just development. We're helping to build a nice fancy golf course and all that. That was nothing like Gillette, was nothing like that.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, you are correct. And I would also point out that the legislature, in the result of these kinds of problems occurring across the state, passed a set of statutes in the late 1990s, as I recall, requiring that DEQ do an adequacy review for water systems and wastewater systems, and that be presented to the commissioners before they consider approving a plat. So yes, there's been some steps to kind of forego those kinds of problems. They still exist from the 1970s, and occasionally we'll get an application from them.
And that's why we're building the second water line for Gillette and tying all them into one big system to try. Yeah, we're cleaning up the mess, and it's taken a long time. I'll have to agree with that.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Evans.
Thank you, Harry. These lots that aren't developed, are they, I'm confused, are they unsold or are they owned by LLCs or whomever? And is it assumed that some of that is speculative ownership for future sale?
Of all of the above. And if I might kind of go forward with a little bit of explanation on the history, it'll kind of define how those lots came to be, who owns them, and some of the changes that have occurred to this particular development. So on the aerial that you see quite some distance away is the Snake River Sporting Club ISD within the aerial, with the exception of the flag parcel to the upper left that crosses the highway. But the highway is coming down along the left of the aerial portion you see. The green outside is U.S. Forest Service, so it's pretty much a landlocked parcel. Historically, the southern portion of that parcel operated as a Snake River Canyon Ranch. The northern parcel was Astoria Hot Springs, operated by the Gill family, open to the public. It was a pretty cool series of a big old hot spring swimming pool, bathhouses, a little cantina. There was camping. My daughter, who's now a 25-year-old school teacher, learned to swim there. The community really used it. In the late 90s, it all got purchased by a developer. One of their first moves was to take the hot springs and frankly just fill it in and close it to the public. It was much to the dismay of the public, to be honest with you. Through that developer and another developer came an approved master plan for a development at this project. It included, and if you might switch to the next slide, please. That's the same area contained within the area. The north area, let me back up, through the bankruptcies and through the call on the bond, all of the infrastructure got created and the platting occurred for the lots. Over time, some of those lots actually got purchased. The golf course, portions of it got constructed. The clubhouse, portions of it got constructed. Incidentally, as Mr. Boyce reminded me, all of the golf course and all of that is irrigated by water rights from the Snake River. So none of it's off of this public water supply. Ultimately, within the last 4 years, new ownership came to buy lots in the southern area that had not been previously purchased. So that's why, and there were a considerable number of them. And the north area got purchased. In that process, an entity, a nonprofit known as the Trust for Public Lands, which is a national nonprofit whose mission is to restore properties and pathways that have high potential use for the public to the public. The old Astoria Hot Springs came under their attention, and through a process, they were able to purchase that area, the 80 acres to the north, sell the development rights that came with that property as part of the master plan to the ownership of the properties to the south, and now have undergone, well, and all of that was done by a mechanism through an amendment to the master plan that was completed in the early 90s or late 90s, early 2000s that defined the amount of density that was allowed there. And frankly, in the north, there was some hotel, there was some condo, there was some commercial. All of that got consolidated into residential development equivalency and transferred to the south. This map is intended to show that 62 units equivalency in the north that then got transferred to those locations in the south. And it wasn't just a clean transfer. They got bought and paid for. They were existing, they were approved, they just had not been built. They got taken down to the south where most of the development had already occurred. And then that allowed the Trust for Public Lands to move forward with the reinstation of the Astoria Hot Springs Park. The master plan amendment to allow that got approved by Teton County. And if I might see the next slide, please, Kevin. This is a letter from Teton County Planning Director Tyler Sinclair explaining that transfer. And the highlighted portion is of emphasis because it says that no additional density beyond that had previously been approved was allowed as part of this amendment. So no new dwelling units, commercial, anything like that was allowed as part of this transfer. Rather, the transfer was the mechanism to recreate Astoria Hot Springs Park in the north and transfer that development to the south. And frankly, there was a purchase to help obviously serve as a financial mechanism. So Kevin, I'm sorry if I might see the next slide. So the Trust for Public Lands has just received development approval from Teton County for the reinstatement of the Hot Springs Park. What it consists of, and may I make sure you can hear me. So again, this is that north. What it includes, this is a residence that has been already constructed that will serve as the manager's house residence. This will be the reinstatement of the part of the hot springs, a series of pools and swimming areas. Again, all open to the public. This will be a dressing room, showers. Then, and this is known as the active part of the park. And then the remainder is going to basically be what's called the passive part. Mr. Lancaster, some of these ponds will be reclaimed or improved for perhaps some fishing, for some habitat, a trail system, some picnic areas. You know, there's wetlands, there's some pretty significant wildlife restrictions seasonally. Environmental analysis is used in some of those areas. But just to understand what the intended use of this area is not going to be, and the Trust for Public Lands is the owner of this now and a partner or a member of the ISD. They get a new tap. They have an existing tap to the old residence, it'll be the manager's residence. They'll get a new one to the bathhouse. This is an existing building that's currently used for some employee housing will convert to maintenance. A new employee housing facility both here for both employees, the resort, and the trust for public land in the park. So just an understanding of what that transfer is and what's going to be created up in there. All of that was done because the density wasn't going to change. The original assumptions under which all infrastructure, including the water system, were being constructed were assumed to be satisfactory. There were no issues with supply. There wasn't a knowledge at that point in time. Well, we analyzed that if the density from up here came down to the south, and the water mains that were built, et cetera, have capacity to serve that density down here instead of up here. We were able to confirm that. Everything was looking good in terms of infrastructure until one of these two wells started going dry in the late summer and early fall. The current ISD has done a lot of work in introducing some additional metering, valving. Everything down here is now required to have a water meter. That's been the last 2 years. So they really upgraded all of that so we can collect the data and understand usages. But again, as I said, what wasn't anticipated in understanding that we had plenty of capacity to serve all of the development, whether it was going to be up here originally or now transferred down there. The wild card was not knowing that particular well was going to have some issues. We aren't currently experiencing any, with the existing amount of build-up that's down there, any supply issues. But we're using all the monitoring and information we have, and there's some lots being sold and being built on. So the ISD is very careful in monitoring to make sure that they can meet those demands. But all the lots that were purchased down here, whether it be one lot or the entities that have bought multiple lots, were done under the auspices of understanding the structure that actually that the well cards become that well. About 2 years ago, I was discovering that seasonally it's having some issues. Our tank and our 50-gallon water that is operating and well working all year round. We're operating well right now. We need sufficient well to provide the redundancy to meet what really is the original demand and understood the development of the first. This is the map that Kevin handed out to you. So basically, again, lots that were up here, another density. Now is these units. Actually, there is a residence up there that maintain those lots. But as I described, the pool, which incidentally has not been built yet. We got the master plan approval, the development approval from county here. Now the trust for public lands are raised in and receiving their design documents. Hopefully be able to begin construction this next summer. That's a function of their abilities. These gray lots are the large parcels that the ones that don't have caps, and they mean never. 2 of them are actually built upon some years ago and have wells. It's anticipated these large 35 acre will have wells, won't be connected to public water system. Then as you come down, you see these are the 6 lots today that will receive 25 of the units from up here. These lots, these 2 lots actually have been replanted recently and received the remainder of those 62 that I described earlier. So that's where those all went. This is all platted, constructed in terms of the infrastructure. And the color coded shows those that have been built upon, including a clubhouse. And also this golf course is irrigated by water from the water rights from the Snake River. There are a couple of restaurants that get served by. So I just kind of wanted to paint north to south the history of. So that's when the definition of development comes. There is no new development in terms of what is allowed down there, in terms of the number of units, etc. But if your definition of new development is a platted lot that exists but doesn't have a house on it, and that house being constructed being the development, well then, yeah, Mr. Labonte is correct. But we would contend that all of this was done under all of the purchases and build out that is occurring, including these transfers, was done with the understanding that infrastructure was in place to be able to serve it. That was until this particular existing well started having issues. And I'd be happy, obviously, to answer any questions or clarify.
I'd like to make a comment and then ask the questions. You know, I liked it when Astoria was there originally, and I used it as, I guess, as much as you did with your daughters and things, but, and I was dismayed to see that it was torn down. And I'm kind of intrigued about the interrelationship between this nonprofit and the Snake River Sporting Club and how that would work. I guess they're just another, I guess, resident, if I'm using the right word, or parcel owner, just like the golf course would be, just like the future development lots would be, and just like the would be. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I mean, I'd emphasize that exactly. They're part of that overall ownership, part of the ISD. I'll emphasize the Trust for Public Land. It's going to be open to the public. In fact, there's some part of their study and analysis, part of approval is just how used are they going to be? You know, traffic and other things that we've addressed through YDOT and whatnot. But yeah, they're part. So that contained within this in-holding parcel in the park, all participating members of the ISD now will be Astoria Hot Springs Park, some large parcel residences, and then the golf course and associated development.
I guess in essence, and I may be a little bit off here, but I don't see this as being too much different than what we did up there at the Broken Wheel Ranch when they ran out of water. In other words, we funded $120,000 feasibility level 1 study that said they had enough water, and then mysteriously 3 months later the water disappeared, and we ended up putting a $1 million well in for them for 20 some residents. And I don't know if you can compare it exactly, but it's pretty close, because I think the water they had originally in their well would have never accommodated the additional development of the lots that the developer had in there. But now that we built this well, I believe they have, I guess, additional water to expand those, and some of those parcels could be developed. Now, I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong there, but I think that's what came out of that. And Kellen, you probably know a little bit about that too.
Sure, Bettis, to just kind of emphasize a point on that is this new development. If the definition of new development is an entity is going to be allowed to plat develop more lots, add another commercial entity or whatever, that will not be allowed. That will not be a function of this new well. That would have to go back through the Teton County approval process. And that was the emphasis of the letter from the planning director, is they were very adamant that in this master plan amendment and in the transfer of development rights from the north to the south, there would not be allowed any net increase unless you consider the inclusion of a park as new development. But because that was but the original developer had intended to reinstall the hot springs, but unfortunately in a very high-end kind of motel or condo style development.
Mr. Zucker.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have some concerns on the rates, so I would like to go over those with you a little bit if we could. One is your tap fees. How does that compare with other peers like Jackson?
So I can speak to that. I manage a lot of the meter reading and installation of a lot of the meters for these facilities.
Currently, we're charging $2,000 to tap into the system. That includes your meter. Honestly, I don't know what it is in the town, but I can't imagine it's any, I can't imagine it's, yeah, I feel 2,000 is considerable. The meters themselves come to us at about 600. So the ISD is getting another $1,400 on top of the cost of the meter. So the ISD does profit. In regards to water rates, we're currently charging $2,000 per 1,000 gallons. Our water rates are,
Wait a minute.
sorry, $2.
That would probably work if that was.
$2
Make it
for
without us.
Yeah.
$2 for every 1,000
Okay.
gallons. So
Right.
that's 0.2 cents per gallon, or 0.02. We're judging in 1,000 gallons, so $2 for every 1,000 gallons for water alone. We also charge them, the ISD also charges for sewer on top of that, on top of all water that's used. So these water fees up there are what most people would consider, and most residents of the ISD, I hear about it, consider exorbitant. Members of the ISD are currently paying in the range of, in July, for water, it's not abnormal to see bills per month of $160 per home and up to $200 per sewer. It's substantial.
I don't think so. I think if you look at that, our base rate in Pine Haven is twice as what yours is. Twice. I think if you look at your peers through the state of Wyoming, and I don't know, maybe we have a tougher way of getting water, but in most cases, you can't go to Gillette and buy water for that. I'll guarantee you that. Anywhere. And I think if your rates, and I guess another question that I would have is, when is the last time since you've known you've had a problem with your well, have you made an increase in your rates to substantiate your cost or to help with the well, or what you would need to as far as any reserve in your water fund? Is there any reserve built?
You're talking reserve dollar wise, or?
Yes, reserve in your water fund.
This is a fairly new ISD, so our reserves we're trying to build up. It's not the strongest ISD at this moment. In regards to rates, I can't speak throughout the state. I know the town of Jackson charges themselves. I worked for the town of Jackson through their irrigation department, and the town was paying the town $2.16 for 1,000 gallons. And they weren't paying a sewer tap rate on top of that. So the members of the ISD are paying more than the town of Jackson pays to itself, and an additional fee on top of that, almost double that in regards to sewer. I can't speak to the rest of the state.
Mr. Suker, Mr. Boyce had actually asked that question as well in one of his reviews. And he provided some information, and I worked with the town. We looked at the Grovant utility, which is basically Jackson Hole Golf and Tennis, the Indian Paintbrush Water District, the town of Jackson, and Melody Ranch ISD. And while some of the reporting was all different, or was somewhat different, the Grovant utility, the average monthly bill is $3,500 or $35, and the residential tap fee is $4,000. Indian Paintbrush, their average monthly bill is $43, and they have no residential tap fee. Town of Jackson, average monthly bill is $28.30, and their residential tap fee is $430. And Melody Ranch ISD, their average monthly bill is $23, and the residential tap fee is $1,000. So basically, with the base rate of $20 for the first 1,000 gallons that our ISD uses, and then $2 per 1,000 gallons after that, and the amount of the tap fee, we felt that we are actually relatively comparable, and in fact a little bit more than the town and some of the other ISDs within our county.
But you're still not making a living with it. It's still not.
And to build on this,
working.
to build on
And that's-
Tom's, the
that's my
ISD is
concern.
somewhat young. And I will say the new ownerships that have come together to form these ISDs have invested pretty heavily in a lot of, as I was saying earlier, metering equipment up on the tank and the well house, as well as on their wastewater facilities, as well as requiring taps on each of the residences. So we are still in the process of gathering data and comparing it to what our other surprises we're finding with this water system, that it was built under a difficult situation on the calling of a bond, perhaps not as well supervised, or I shouldn't say as well supervised. The county had plenty of other things going on to try to provide full-time observation of the construction. So it's all there. We just find surprises now and again that at every turn have required resources to repair, to upgrade.
Thank you.
I keep going back because I remember I was working at the legislature when the whole argument about whether water development funds ought to be going to, quote, developers was really clear. And I swam at Astoria too, so I got a long history up there. And I'm not at all convinced this is not a development. I think that these lots and where they're located, and I guarantee that the original purpose of this thing was for development. And you keep emphasizing that the public can use the hot springs. Well, the public cannot use the golf course. And I'd be willing to bet you that 99% of the people that move in there are moving in to go to the private golf course, not to go hang out at a public hot springs that the rest of the unwashed public gets to show up at. I mean, I've watched the litigation over this, and I know why the thing went belly up, but I think that especially the LLCs that are purchasing these lots, I think they are doing it for speculative value. And I think that if they got this fancy new water system, they're going to sell those lots for a whole lot more than they paid for it. And the other thing is, I think this is a money pit. I mean, I think it was Commissioner Lancaster said, so is the infrastructure there to get it to the homes? And you said, yes, but you got to put in a pipe. I just think there are going to be 45 buts, and it's going to be like Gillette Madison all over again. And I do have some sympathy, because I think that a lot of the reason the thing went belly up is because of the litigation and some of that other stuff by groups like Jackson Hole Trust that just knew that if you put in a golf course, the entire bald eagle population in northern Wyoming was going to crash and die. But I'm not convinced this isn't a development, and I'm not convinced that public dollars ought to be going to fund such a huge project that I think is going to make money for somebody in the end.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Evans.
I don't want to jump the gun, but the way I look at this, it's somewhat confusing to me. I mean, I know it's not one of the Gillette subdivisions that, was fully built out with individual homeowners and an inadequate water system. And it's not a development that clearly where you have to request that the developer fund all the costs. It's somewhere in between, but it's somewhat hard for me to sit here and try to figure out where in between, which gets back to my original question: who owns these lots and what's their purpose? So to me, the best I can do, and I appreciate all this information, but the best I can do is defer to the staff recommendation of the 19%, because they've looked at who owns these undeveloped lots and for what purpose, and where this division sits somewhere between these Gillette type subdivisions and a subdivision that should be the responsibility of the developer. So to me, I would be willing to make a motion to approve the staff recommendation, which is this number 2.
Which would be tomorrow. Make motions today.
Right.
So,
Go ahead.
the SRC or SRSC gatehouse? What is that? Is that like gated community?
Yes, there's a gate at the border of the community property in between where the golf course, the residential properties are, and where the hot springs is.
Everything past that possible development?
That's correct. Just one quick point of clarification in regards to Commissioner Evans's questions, as well as the staff's recommendations here on the undeveloped lots windfall, just to try and clarify that a little bit. There are 35 properties that are privately held that are included in that. Certainly, some of those properties are held by LLCs, assorted other company entities, etc. But a very small percentage of those are for sale, and the overwhelming majority of those are people that have bought pre-retirement, future retirement, et cetera, that just haven't built on those home sites yet. But they are, I guess, what I would deem and describe as privately held. They certainly have no relation to the concept of developer, the owner of the club that holds real estate there. And those numbers are included in that.
Lancaster.
So can we turn this into a Shark Tank, Daniel? Can we give you water for a whale in return for 10% of? No, I'm just teasing. I'm trying to lighten it up. I really appreciate your presentation. I want to swim at Astoria again, so that's why I want to strike a deal. I can see that it's looking kind of like private.
Commissioner Seacon.
Harry, just to, if we do something, and, you know, I'm soon to be off the commission, so this is probably going to be something that'll be on somebody else's shift. But once we commit dollar number one to this, as Commissioner Bud Fallon said, I see this as a money pit. The transmission lines, actually building the well, I see this as either whether it's 19% or, you know, $10,000 or $180,000. This is going to be turning into millions of dollars at some point in time. So historically, if we spend dollar number one, we usually follow it through. Is that accurate statement?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, again, as has been explained, the bonds were exercised that the county had guaranteed to build these improvements. So there have been water system improvements made. I don't know that we'll be looking at coming in and saying, okay, well, instead of a 6-inch main here, we need to build a 10-inch main at some point. As indicated, there are areas that this system may need to be extended into. And I feel that's a cost that we would look to the district. If you're going to open up additional lands for these lots that are existing and now propose for development, that would be something the district would have to pay. So I don't know that I agree that this is the first step in a long number of projects here. I think the system's pretty well defined and it's fairly new. Although the water resource perspective, the wells have proven to be inadequate in terms of the supply. So,
Commissioner, exactly. I want to make sure. When the county closed on that bond, they built all of the mains, the entirety of the development, and including obviously areas where lots have been built on, obviously, and those adjacent to them, they'll just have them. And then these two receiving areas that took the density. Part of the county's approval of the master plan amendment to allow that transfer to occur, the analysis that said the existing mains that are in there, the 8-inch mains, have, and the supply that they are, the water they're carrying, the supply is adequate to serve that density being down there. So it isn't like now we need to go construct all mains. The main I spoke of, I apologize, is from there will need to be a main that connects the new well to the existing system, which we would expect, but we also understand that that's part of the ISD's responsibility, not a request we can make of the WWDC.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
So, Mr. for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as was indicated in the discussion, we're providing this information to you because it is comprehensive. Want you to fully understand now what's in this development, and the decision with regards to the groundwater exploration grant will be on tomorrow's agenda. You have another groundwater exploration grant to be considered as well, but this one we knew was going to take further explanation. So that's why it's on the work session today.
With that, we've got one more item left. I'm going to turn this one over to Jennifer, who's our facilitator, to do the review of the draft rule for Chapter 8, delegation of duties.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to turn to Harry for.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for refresher, I'll say, about 2 years ago, the Management Audit Committee of the legislature published its report or review of the program, had a number of recommendations. One of those recommendations dealt with the authorities of the commission versus the duties of the office, and suggested or recommended that there was a need for additional rulemaking, and also in a separate recommendation recommended that the office and the commission define this delegation of duties. Who does what? And of course, statutes give the commission broad authorities over this program, but then what is the office's role? And so that started us down a path in 2016, which ultimately ended up in a document that the commission approved in October 2016 that defined that delegation of duties. What was the statutory authority, what were the commission's responsibilities under that, and then what functions the office provided in terms of support. I thought that we had addressed the concerns of the Management Audit Committee report. Well, and then I will say that our friends in the 2017 legislature, some of them are here today, threw us a little bit of a curveball, and that a statute was passed that said that, in fact, yes, the commission can delegate administrative duties to the office, but via a rulemaking process or through rulemaking. So the previous document that was approved in October of 2016 did not meet the test of a rule. So since that time then, 2017, we had some discussions in August about what authorities would you want to delegate to the office. Had the workshop in August. We talked about that briefly. There was a different document that was put together. What I was trying to do at that point in time was to get your opinion of what duties you would like to delegate and what you would prefer to keep in yourself, or keep to yourself, or keep to the commission in terms of just authority and decision making. However, where we're at today, then, so we didn't discuss it in November. And then what I drafted here, this draft Chapter 8 that's now under Tab D, is what I think a comprehensive list of functions that the office provides in support of the commission, comprehensive, and I would propose that it's a rule now that you can review, and certainly if there are things in this listing that you disagree with or you think the commission should retain and not delegate, then it is not going to hurt my feelings that say, okay, we're going to strike paragraph J or whatever it might be. But know that I think these, in developing this, I do think there's a role for the office in all of these items. It is your choice on whether you delegate it, and it has to be done through rule. The other thing that I would tell you is that in this draft, I tried to, with Daniel's insistence, to really focus on the statutes. What do the statutes say the commission shall do? And tried to duplicate that language in this rule. so that we are consistent with the statutes. And then, of course, I provided in this draft rule the statutory references in red in parentheses. That's not part of the proposed rule. It's merely that if you want to go look at that particular statute and see how it matches up with the particular paragraph in the rule. So that's kind of the history that has gotten us here today. I believe now, with regards to this management audit committee, it is the last recommendation that has to be resolved before we can say we have dealt with all of the recommendations in the management audit committee that pertain to the commission. So.
All right, thank you. So my understanding and suggestion for this session is that the purpose is to discuss any questions that the commission has about the draft rule, and to discuss any changes that you might like to make, and that the decisions regarding any potential changes will be taken up tomorrow. Is that fair, Mr. Chair? Okay, great. And what I would like to ask the commission members to do is, if you have a question that you'd like to raise or a change that you'd like to propose and discuss, if you would just turn your nameplate on its side, that will help me to keep track of who would like to raise questions or make comments.
I'm confused. Are you talking about generally or?
About the draft chapter 8, the draft rule that's under discussion right now. Thanks. Fallon.
Here it goes.
This actually isn't that bad. When we did this the first time, our little subcommittee thing did look at these. And I had written a thing that I gave to Harry that frankly I'd totally forgotten about, but thankfully he emailed it back to me. And I was okay with most of this, but I wanted in their reporting requirements to the commission. Because I don't like being called by people in the state and have them ask me questions about the Water Development Commission that I've never heard of. It's really frustrating. And I think that Harry and the commission are doing significantly better now than we were for a while. But I would still like to add back in some of these places, report to the commission, because Harry is not going to be the director forever. And I think that all directors ought to be reminded that they've got to at least give reports and stuff to the commission. And if we read them, that's great. And if you don't have to, and life is good. So I've got a few of those in some of these. And then Harry and I had a conversation yesterday or day before, I can't remember, and he flagged for me number T, which is the eminent domain. And I don't know that I am particularly comfortable with having the Water Development Office or the commission having the eminent domain. And I just think we ought to talk about it. Because that just, I mean, I'm not a fan of eminent domain anyway, so that just really bothers me. So I just think we ought to have a conversation.
Thanks. So I'd like to just ask you one follow-up question. Could you mention the specific places where you'd like to add reporting to the commission?
Sure. Give me a second and I can give them to you.
Okay.
I don't know if section 3F is the right place to do it, but starting, when I first started on the commission, there were no reports to the commissioners about level 3 construction projects and where they were and how they were going. And we talked about it at some point, and you guys started doing that. And I think it's really good and really helpful. So I don't know if that's a place to emphasize that you guys are doing that now. And I think it is helpful to hear where we are on construction, level 3 construction. So that's one of the places that I flagged. When I first started on the commission with regard to G, there weren't any reports about public hearings or public meetings and how stuff was going. I thought that report is really helpful. I really appreciate getting Katie's list of here's all the public hearings you guys ought to know about. My schedule stinks, so I can't hardly go, but Kellen went to some, Jeanette's gone to some, Jared Geis has gone to some. I want to keep getting those reports because I think those are really helpful. Okay, I already flagged number T because I just think we ought to talk about the eminent domain thing.
Which one?
T. On page 8-2. Then I guess I have a question on U and V. I know there's some bills in front of the legislature this next time about in-stream flow and the game and fish and how those applications come about. So my general question is if the legislation changes with regard to how in-stream flow is done, are we going to have to go back in and amend these delegations of authority? And it's okay if we are. I just would note that there's bills about that, and I didn't know how that all worked together.
Harry.
Mr. Chairman, and certainly representative senators, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm aware of one bill that deals with the in-stream flow law, and its purpose is to transfer responsibility of the feasibility study, and that's the hydrologic feasibility study, which is currently conducted by Water Development and paid for by Water Development. The purpose of the bill would be to move the financial responsibility, not who does the report, that would still remain with the commission, but the financial responsibility would be paid for by the game and fish. That's the only one that I'm aware of. So I don't think that it structurally changes the relationship of how an in-stream flow permit or water right is created. Okay.
All right, then that's fine. And then maybe with regard to the level 3 construction projects on number Roman numeral X or Roman numeral 10 on page 8-3, maybe if you just put report to the commission in there, that'd be the best place to deal with that. I mean, these are just my thoughts. And then on number Z, I think that doing the report to the commission on O&M accounts and how much money is where, I don't know if we need to, if it would be redundant to put a report to the commission in there or not. And so I'm actually not suggesting any new reports because I think the reporting now and how we do the reporting is better. I just wanted to get it in writing somewhere that we just kind of changed these over the years from when I first got on the commission till now. And I just want to substantiate that we, at least, I shouldn't say we, I will say I really appreciate the new reporting requirements and the new stuff that Harry and the staff are doing to keep us a lot more up to date on what's going on and what's being spent and what hearings are out there. I think it's all way better than when I started.
So Commissioner Burdon, for example, in 3F, your suggestion might be something like administer and provide the primary point of contact for all level 3 construction grants and loans and provide reports on these to the commission. Is that
right? If that's the right place to put it, maybe there's a better place to put that stuff. I just know that the new process we're doing of reporting to the commission is really good. So I don't care where you put it.
Okay.
I just like that in there.
So I think there are some other commissioners who have some comments on this. Yes, thanks. So Commissioner Lancaster.
So Commissioner Van Fallon on F or on T, and you talked about eminent domain. What would you rather that said, or how would you like that to be?
I guess it would be my suggestion that if eminent domain is going to be used in any situation, that be a commission decision, or at least reported to the commission before the office starts down that path. Because I think eminent domain is a big enough stick that the commission needs to at least have notice or involvement in every decision. Now, if the commission says, yeah, you've got to use eminent domain, then I think the staff can, do their thing and follow the statute. But I really don't want to be a commissioner and have somebody call me and say, guess what? I just got a notice of eminent domain from the Water Development Office. I mean, you can't even fathom how bad I would hate that.
Well, I agree. The way I read that, though, is that it's creation of that to the office. Correct me if I'm wrong, Harry, but I think I agree. I think we should have the say in that, saying we're going to use it. Hopefully, we never do. But I think that this is just saying that they get the administration of the eminent domain.
So Harry, could you speak to that, and then Commissioner Bettis will come to your question.
So, Mr. Chairman, let me read to you the statute, because that's really the basis of this. 41-2-122, paragraph C. In proceeding with level 3 construction and operation plans, the commission shall follow the requirements of the Wyoming Eminent Domain Act, shall negotiate in good faith with affected landowners, and in addition shall attempt to mitigate damages which may occur from the impacts enumerated in subsection A of this section. So it just notice that if we do use eminent domain, and this would be a state-owned project, most of the time our grants go to sponsors. Sponsors are required to acquire the land. But in that scenario, you're obligated to follow the Eminent Domain Act. What this is saying, T, in proceeding with level 3 construction projects, negotiate in good faith with affected landowners and follow the requirements of the Eminent Domain Act. So I think it's inferring that those negotiations would be done by the office, not the commission, is what the inference is there. And so I understand we don't like eminent domain. Is it a tool or a tool in our tool chest? Absolutely. But I'm not aware that the commission has used that in its history, but certainly it's there. So we're saying here that we would negotiate in good faith and follow the act if a decision is made to go to eminent domain. But that decision, I think, still resides with the commission. It's not saying that the office is taking on that decision making at all. At least that's the intent.
I guess then I would feel, but I'd still feel more comfortable. It would say, if it said, in proceeding with level 3 construction projects, upon direction of the Water Development Commission, negotiate in good faith with affected landowners, blah, blah, blah. I think that is so powerful against the landowner that everybody here knows who I represent. And
my experience on the Board of Public Utilities here in Cheyenne, and they have large projects, they would have to go out and get easements. And then on a couple of occasions when they just couldn't get to an agreement with a landowner, they would come in and report to the board that we might have to go to an eminent domain situation, and they would keep the board up updated. I don't know if they asked for the board approval to do that or not. Be necessary, although I'm not opposed to that. But certainly a reporting requirement, whereas this board knows that there's been an impasse reached and eminent domain might be necessary. I would expect the staff, even without anything in this regulation, to report that to us. But I wouldn't mind seeing that, because we want to make clear that we do know in advance that we've reached impasse with this unreasonable landowner or not, and want to go forward. So that's been my experience on some big projects, and I think at least a little bit of reporting language would be good.
Commissioner Evans, would you support the suggestion of adding some language upon the direction of the commission? And would you suggest something in addition?
I mean, I don't.
Would you suggest something in addition to that regarding the reporting?
You know, I don't really mind at the direction of the commission. I think if you're going to institute an eminent domain, and that's a big enough deal, as Harry has recognized, I think to have that be a motion is okay with me. Yeah.
Yes.
I just had a question. Harry, when you put this together, I think there's some other places in the statute that do require the commission to be notified. And so did we cross-reference that with what you have here or not? And I don't have any specific place, but I seem to recall some places where.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bettis, none really are coming to my mind in terms of a specific reporting requirement from the office to the commission.
What you're saying, I see what you're saying. You're saying the commission is supposed to do this, and what you've identified everything that
we delegate.
We're now delegating to you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I think all of these represent some things that the office currently does to support the commission, and some of the, well, I think many of these do represent kind of the project manager's efforts on these projects. Here's what we're doing, and certainly we report back as appropriate. But the statutes themselves don't really call for a reporting requirement from the office back to the commission.
So I think that you have some proposed additional language to consider tomorrow regarding the eminent domain. And I think also the question regarding in-stream flows was answered. So I just wanted to go back to the suggestion to add, to explicitly state that the office would report to the commission in a number of different places. And Commissioner Bud Fallon had asked, is there a different place, where the office might suggest including something like that? Could you speak to that, Harry?
Mr. Chairman, so relative to paragraph F, administer and provide primary point of contact for all level 3 construction grants and loans. So I left out a statutory reference there. So let me first read that to you, because it is one of the few places that references the office. And this would be 41.2.117C, subparagraph C. And there it says, all grant and loan programs over which the commission has authority shall be administered by the Wyoming Water Development Office. So there is a statutory delegation that occurs now. This was intended to really say we, the office, will function as that primary point of contact on these level 3 projects. But let me suggest this. Rather than putting that reporting requirement in F, what if we were to add another subparagraph under X, where administer level 3 construction projects, including but not limited to the performance of the following duties, and we list those, if we were to add a Romanet 9 that says what, and provide periodic construction project updates or level 3 construction project updates to the commission, would that, because then we're capturing all of those duties in a level 3 that we perform. I'm going to make a note so I don't forget that here. So it would be a 9 that would say, provide periodic reports or construction project. I'll use level 3 construction project reports to the commission.
Going on to the next suggestion was that there be reference about notification or reporting to the commission about the 3G. So what about something like plan, advertise, notify the commission regarding and conduct public hearings, et cetera, et cetera? Or would you have another suggestion regarding that? And maybe Commissioner Beth Fallon, I would ask, is your interest mainly in knowing about the hearings in advance or having a report about them afterward? Both, okay.
Which is what
Sorry.
we do now.
Sorry.
I
Didn't
just
mean to talk for you.
Yeah, no. Because with the advance notice and some of the commissioners actually go to things and then hearing at the end, I think is helpful.
Mr. Chairman, currently that paragraph is saying, and projects authorized by the commission, but here we're talking about providing notice. So plan, advertise, comma, provide notice to the commission, and conduct public hearings, public meetings. Does that?
Want to add some language about providing reports on the hearings afterwards, like the one that was provided earlier today?
Excuse me, could I make could I make a suggestion that since we're doing delegation of duties under section 3, since the commission is delegating several duties, maybe up there, we say, and report where appropriate for the following, because there's many of these that it's already happening, but maybe have that be before we get to subparagraph A. The commission delegates the following administrative duties, but reporting will be I'm not sure what wordsmithing to be done, but up in that area, so it really captures all of these where necessary, I guess. Rather than picking out one paragraph at a time and talk about reporting, we can get it all in one shot. The commission delegates the following administrative duties to the office with reporting to the commission. Sorry, I'm having a brain burp, but someplace up in there that so it can capture all of the subparagraphs when necessary.
So, Mr. Chairman, if on that, I think this is a good suggestion. So commission delegates the following administrative duties to the office, and the office shall provide periodic reports to the commission. Periodic, I'll make that progress reports to the commission.
keeps us from picking out, you know, so.
So would this be in addition to the two that you've already talked about, adding a 10 under 3X?
I would be inclined to strike those with that all-encompassing language under the heading, the section 3 heading.
I would just invite discussion of that proposal. Commissioner Glick?
I was just wondering how, so this will all go under 3 at the top and then strike everything below it. Right?
That's a proposal. So I would invite you to weigh in on that today so that you have clarity about the decisions you want to make tomorrow.
I understand what he's saying.
I'm not saying strike the A, B's, and C's.
Right.
I'm just saying that we're going to be reporting on
Additions we
those.
just
Right, just the reporting part. I'm not saying strike any of those, actually. Okay.
So we were talking about striking G. Does that mean everything else will move up a letter?
Actually, let me clarify. My understanding is that what would be struck is the proposed addition to G, which
Yeah, so
was
pretend like I
provide
didn't
notice to
talk.
commission. So the two things, so here's a quick summary. To section 3, the commission delegates the following administrative duties to the office would be added, and the office shall provide periodic progress reports to the commission.
For the following.
Yeah, for the following
For the
duties.
following.
Okay, for the following
stuff.
duties. Okay. And what would not be added are two things that were talked about earlier. So under 3G, you would not be adding provide notice to the commission. And under 3X, the new number 10 that was discussed would not be added, which was going to say, and provide periodic level 3 project updates to the commission. So it would be great to hear anyone who would like to opinion or suggestions regarding that proposal, adding language to section 3, the two additions we had discussed earlier. Commissioner Seekin? Oh, was your card up from earlier?
Oh, that was from before, sorry.
I agree with what you're saying. It'd be better to replace the top on section 3.
Can you speak up, Cliff? Sorry, getting the red card.
I agree that we move that, what is that, 9 under X to the section 3 delegation of duties. That way it would cover everything and
I hate that.
Do you?
No, I think it's fine.
That's fine.
Okay. Any other questions or comments regarding the draft rule, chapter 8, delegation of duties?
Mr. Chairman,
He suggested some language. This is dealing with the same topic, delegation of duties under this 3. Adding potentially, so it would read, the commission delegates the following administrative duties to the office, and when requested, comma, the office shall provide periodic progress reports to the commission. It puts a request in there so that at least you may not want to hear everything that 25 employees are doing on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, it requires a request. So just a suggestion at this point.
Comments on that suggestion? Commissioner Bud Fallon?
I don't know that though that captures the reports that we get now, which is all I'm trying to do. I may not necessarily think about asking for a list of the public hearings that you're going to do. And so I think if it says when requested, then we're not going to get that list from Katie of the public hearings you're going to do. Or the level 3 construction projects, if we don't know when they're over, then we're not going to know to request a report of what happened when they were over. I'm absolutely not trying to request anything additional, because I think that the way we're doing it is fine. I just wanted to capture what it is you're doing.
Commissioner Seekin?
Yeah. And I'm really just following up on Karen. I don't want to feel like I already feel like this is our responsibility, and we're asking you to help us carry out our responsibility. So the onus is on you to make sure that we're given the information that we need that's part of our purview. So I don't, and when new commissioners come on, they're not going to know to ask for X or request. It takes a while to figure some of that stuff out, and which we've all done, which is why we've made some progress in what information is given. So I think I would, since we're delegating some duties, it's my view that the office needs to, and does, always remember that they're our duties that you're doing on our behalf. So it is up to you to report to us. I'm not saying to report every day what 25 staff, I mean, we're all adults here. We know what you guys are doing, and you know what you should be letting us know. So I don't think we need to, I don't think it should be up to us to request. These are our responsibilities that we're asking you to help us with. So you guys have to figure out what you think we need to know.
Commissioner Glick?
I think that's where the that periodic portion would come in, so it wouldn't be day-to-day operations, just, you know, that's what needs to be reported.
Commissioner Evans?
You know, I think what I hear Jeanette saying, and Karen, is with the language that Jeanette originally requested, would just have common sense applied to it. I think that's always a good thing. I think that as requested, which is an attempt to kind of winnow it down, I understand. I'm not real comfortable with that. So I think if we apply common sense to Jeanette's language, we're in a good place.
And what I would say is that it reverses the requesting. So at some point, if the commission says we're getting too much information, then you can take a position at that point in time. It doesn't have to go into these rules. You no longer need to report this to us, or this is too frequent, as the case may be. And again, it's this working relationship that we have of what do you need to carry out your statutory duties, and we're here to support that effort. So if you need more reporting or less reporting, we will do that. So we'll leave the requesting part out.
Any other questions or comments regarding the draft rule, Chapter 8? Yes.
It's more of a comment. So if you go to subsection W, the way that's worded, it's inconsistent with the statute. So more of a technical correction. But if you go to W, it says on behalf of the state, administer in-stream flow water rights granted by the state engineer. The Water Development Office or the Commission has the authority to administer water rights in the state of Wyoming. If you go to the statute, it's under 108. The way that's structured is subsection A, the Game and Fish Commission shall report to the Water Development Commission the need to regulate a stream to protect the priority of an in-stream flow right. The report shall include information establishing present and future damage to the fishery if the stream is not regulated. Now, here's the point. The commission, on the next working day, shall submit the report to the state engineer and call for stream regulation. So it's not the commission or the office's job to regulate the stream. That is the state engineer's job. Under the statute, you're to request the state engineer, because you are the water right holders on those in-stream flows, has to put in a written request pursuant to a report from the Game and Fish Department to administer that in-stream flow water right. So it's technically incorrect. It's currently worded. It's a very easy fix to do that. But I think because this does become a delegation of duties, it should be consistent with the statute. So it could be very easily fixed and say under subsection W, it says on behalf of the state of Wyoming, request that the state engineer's office administer an in-stream flow water right.
Thanks. Any questions or comments regarding that suggestion? Harry?
Back. So on behalf of the state of Wyoming, comma, request that the state engineer's office administer So, okay. So water right becomes singular. Can we strike granted by the state engineer at that point in time? It's assumed, yeah. It's assumed at that point, okay. And Mr. Chairman, just for a little explanation, the statute of delegation is very specific that you can delegate administrative duties. That's where administer came in. But actually, I had a note from our state engineer's office representative as well that there was a conflict there. But yes.
Thanks for that clarification. Any other questions or suggestions? Okay. Thanks. I think we have the suggested changes to this for your discussion tomorrow, and I will turn it back to the chairman.
Okay, well, with that, Harry.
Mr. Chairman, my thoughts to you is that this afternoon, I'll incorporate these changes into this document, and we'll have a clean document to you tomorrow that you can consider, and a refresher on rulemaking for the state of Wyoming. Once you, the governing body, makes a decision to move forward with rulemaking, that starts a pretty extensive process, the first of which is the development of a statement of reason why you want to do this. That is really born out of the statute that was passed last year that you must, in order to delegate duties, rulemaking process. That will be the statement of reason. That gets submitted to the governor's office. If the governor approves going forward with the rulemaking process, then that initiates, we will advertise the rule for public comment. There's a 45-day comment period. There are some provisions in there that if more than, 15 people request a public hearing, or an organization having more than 25 members requests a public hearing, then we would schedule a public hearing as part of this process. All of that information, then those comments come back to you for consideration. You may revise the rule at that point in time, as long as it doesn't significantly change the initial intent. You then take an action to agree that, yes, we want to promulgate this rule. That in turn then gets filed with the governor and the management council. And if all of that works well, we may have a new rule. So that would be the action, at least an action to initiate rulemaking on this document that I would be seeking tomorrow, if you want to move forward. If you'd like to think about this until the next meeting, that's certainly your prerogative. I will tell you that I would like to report to the Management Audit Committee on January 23rd that here's the action we're taking to resolve the last and final item of recommendation. So,
any questions for Harry on that, or comments? Okay. Well, with that, that's the last item on our agenda for today. Do you have anything else to add, Harry?
Chairman?
Commissioner Seekin.
Well, Harry's, I would like to hear from Senator Hicks from some of the information we've gotten on some of the bills, maybe some thoughts and comments. It's been very helpful. I appreciate you sending that, but maybe we could discuss that, or
We do have a discussion item.
did I miss
tomorrow
it?
for that, yeah.
Okay,
It's at
sorry.
the end for discussion.
Okay.
Item 14.
Okay. Is there anything we should be hearing today? For
Well, what
tomorrow?
I would say is we have made paper copies of each of those 5 bills. So if you wanted to take those with you tonight, if you want to study them further, if you don't have the electronic copy, but yeah, and Senator, I think a conversation you and I had is that you were very interested in comments from the commission with regards to that legislation. So I think we've kind of keyed that up for tomorrow afternoon, hopefully.
And it would be nice, but since there's so few legislators today, I'm assuming there's probably going to be more tomorrow, or you guys know.
Certainly hope so, Mr. Chairman.
It would be nice for more of them to hear our comments, I guess, I think. So anyway, with that, I guess we will adjourn the meeting.